Hello, hello, hello. I guess a quick video today. I don't know how long I'll make it today because we had a long video last time, and these need to become more regular, right? So today, so I actually, it's interesting because maybe this is a request, an academic request, but it's interesting, and I'm probably overthinking this, right? So if we are, as you know, certain people are more prone to overthinking than others. And I think I'm probably overthinking this, but if I can make if you'll indulge me for the time as I make an excuse for myself, I think one of the reasons I'm overthinking it per se is because I do think that what we're trying to do here is fit it into a framework. So this is interesting too because a lot of stuff going on. As you can see, this is where I'm on the clock. I'm literally on the. I'm just kidding. Hopefully, not literally on the clock, but I'm on the clock and I'm trying to figure this stuff out. So, what's interesting here, right, is that there. So guys. So guess what happened to me? We did a little experiment. I mean, I did. I don't know. But it's interesting. It was a demonstration, I think, more than an experiment. But it was interesting because, and I'm thinking, I don't know. It was interesting because of what happened, and then obviously the question is how to interpret it, right? So this is sort of the real. There's sort of the results, and then there's sort of the interpretation, right? And so the results were, I think, in other words, like I think we didn't have, it wasn't an experiment. This is me mistalking too, right? It was clearly just a sort of like demonstration, like vinegar and baking soda, the volcano, right, erupted. But all right. So, but it's interesting because so let's talk about what happened, and then I'll talk about what happened, and then I'll put my results. But here's the thing, right? So this is more process, maybe. It's so interesting. One of the interesting things, though, is that I don't really know. I'm going to talk out my thoughts. I don't have a strong understanding of what it actually means. However, it could. I'm willing to be like, in other words, like if you give me the bad news, just give it to me. And let me sort of handle this, like it's very interesting to me. But anyway, so let's talk about what happened, right? So I was going to, for better or worse, like, right? So there was, see, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of different factors, right? So let's talk, dude. What happened? You're probably like, what happened? No, what happened is that I was going to engage in an activity, right? It was going to be an activity that was purely sort of for my fun and relaxation, right? So, you think relaxation, you think sort of like winding down, you think, you guys know what relaxation is, right? But there's sort of this idea that, in terms of our theory that we're working with, relaxation means specifically something that is, sort of an internalized sort of lack of sort of anxious activity, right? One of the things about me, which guilty as charged and some of this stuff, is that I consider myself to be an anxious person, right? I don't know if the word high strung is something that you would apply, you would say to me. However, it is the case that I get very anxious, right? I get very anxious in crowds. I get very anxious. I don't know if you guys can't see this, but my, maybe you can see my shoulder. My leg shakes. I have like sort of shaky leg syndrome. I don't know what that means, but it is the case that like, there is a sort of, I used to get that a lot, when I would take like school tests. As a matter of fact, one of my classmates used to comment about that, right? It's interesting. It's interesting because, it does indicate to me, and like I said, you interpret all of these results as you will. To me, I don't know that it necessarily, most people would say you're an anxious person, right? However, it could be the fact that you get excited, and I guess like excitable. To me, this is where sort of like what is open for interpretation, what's not open for interpretation, right? To me, that's in itself a question. If we sort of go up, who is willing to have stuff open for interpretation, who is not, what do the results show, what do results not show? This was not like sort of, in my opinion, a controlled experiment. However, whatever. But it's interesting because it is the case that I get very socially anxious. I'll say that. I think that's to my. In other words, like I think that some of my problems in life are because I sometimes like I like to be able to be there with somebody and be able to sort of control the atmosphere. I don't feel comfortable controlling the atmosphere. However, at the same time, I might be receptive to sort of the emotions of the atmosphere. So therefore, it'd be difficult for me to control it in that regard. I don't know. I'm just surmising. I think there's, like I said, one of the themes about this video, as you might say, is interpretation. I do believe that's, to me, that's something that's why we need philosophers. We need good philosophers. We need philosophers who are going to sort of help the general public understand their own stuff. Whatever you learn, there's a sort of interpretation for that fact, right? So I don't know, but that's the thing. But it's interesting because what happened? This was a fun video to make. As I say in 6 minutes. No, it's interesting. So I was engaged in an activity for the purpose of relaxation, right? Now let me say something about this in particular, because I think this would be a question for. So let's go like we did last video. We broke down sort of romantic styles, right? Today's video, we're going to be once again we're going to be referencing what I call the theory, right, which is going to be specifically, sort of the what I will call the Renin traits. I'm pulling them up right now, and so what we're going to talk about right now, before anything else, is sort of. I feel funny like referencing this. It's sort of like it gives it sort of an official status too. This is me, whatever. I am curious. This is interesting, right? This is what I love. This is what I can't ask for anything else. If I can sort of get an understanding, get a sort of acceptance of myself through this or through whatever, and learn to see it's okay, like I don't want to be sort of like SOL for life because of who I, sort of whatever. That's the point. But okay, so we're looking at this and we're saying to ourselves, we're saying that there are one of the essential dichotomies, like sort of the one of the main ways to sort of differentiate is this idea of a judicious type of person and a decisive type of person. And so the idea is that, if you're judicious, right, you're obviously going to be more relaxed by nature. Now, you might imagine that that's sort of the opposite of an anxious person. So by being an anxious person, maybe I'm decisive in it, whatever. Anyway, so I was going to, and there's a lot to this. I'm just pulling this to the side because I don't know if this has implications for judicious decisive as well, right? Anyway, so I was going to relax, right? And now I'm mobilized. See, there's so much we can sort of do with this. I still believe, in my opinion, like in my genuine opinion, there's sort of open for interpretation stuff. I would be willing to entertain any comments that anybody has to clarify this. Obviously, I would be grateful at that fact. But because I honestly don't, I'm having trouble. I need to sort of, one thing, whatever you say about me, one thing that maybe lags behind is the sort of understanding and sort of this idea of like, okay, I see why this applies to me, right? Like I see why, you say I'm a decisive type, i.e. you get anxious all the time, right? Or i.e. you start mobilizing for activities before you do it. It is very easy to get me mobilized, right? So this idea of like judicious types, I mean, you guys can read it. It's, if you just look it up. But the point is that judicious types take longer to be mobilized. So I suppose there's something about them not being as excitable, right? Now, I think that this could probably be, in other words, I think there's complications to this. Maybe this is me overcomplicating stuff, but I do think that it's interesting. It's interesting, sort of, excitable versus non-excitable, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so the point, so the what happened, and now we're in 10 minutes in because this is rambling video, right? But I am this is very interesting to me. This was very interesting. I would love to do more like this. This is very interesting. Anyway, so what happened? The idea there is that I was all of a sudden, um, so I had I see it's really interesting because this is gets to kind of me, and like I said, I think this was a result specific. This was a sort of this happened to me personally. So we gotta to me you gotta look at like all the different factors of who I am in order to interpret it properly, in my opinion, right? Anyway, so the point, and this is what makes studying people, right? Studying people like subjects, whatever. I think more difficult because I do believe I've always been of the, it's funny. Someone who wants to study people, maybe because I don't, I think maybe I'm promulgating, I'm mobilized by my own anxiousness, right? Like it's hard for me to connect with people. And so therefore it would behoove me to study people or sort of like get an understanding, right? Anyway, I also am just kind of interested, whatever. But, so what? Are we 11 minutes? No, I'm just kidding. It's so funny. I'm sorry. Anyway, okay. So what happened? So I'm trying to explain this. Maybe. So there was something that put me both relaxed and maybe so the idea is like giddiness, right? Giddiness, giggling. I can tend to, when I'm around people, specifically when I'm around sort of females, I think when I'm around men or males, it's more of subdued. I think because of, I identify as a male, I am a male, and I am a straight male actually, right? And so I don't, it's not in my interest to identify, to manifest a sort of giggly nature with other males, right? But with females, I think not only is it sort of, with all there's, like femininity is the softer, right, of the two sort of sexes and genders. And so not that as between male or female, females are softer, right? So, and so because of that softness, I think, as you can probably tell, I'm naturally kind of a softie at heart myself, right? That's not something, I say that and it's not, it's not something that I'm particularly proud of for sure, right? However, if, this is where it's sort of like, it is what it is. Like, it's not, realistically speaking, that's kind of who I am, right? I'm soft. And so when I know, no, but when I'm around someone who's, and like I said, I don't mean this. Now I'm sort of like, but the point is that I tend to be I can be giggly. I can be sort of like, to me, my natural state is to sort of be. And I think we talked about this. Did I talk? I didn't post that video, but I recorded a video that I didn't actually end up posting, but it was about sort of yielding versus obstinate, which is another dichotomy. And, yielding versus obstinate traditionally, right, is referred to as sort of, more of obstinate is more of a masculine trait and yielding is more of a feminine trait, right? And I don't know, it's not, it's pretty clear that given the pure mathematical dichotomy, that it doesn't purely map onto, females or males, right? So there's a very feminine type that is, technically considered one of the more feminine types, yet is, sort of obstinate. And that's interesting. Or considered obstinate under the Renan dichotomy. So to me, this is how this stuff does get complicated. We would like to be a result orientation and say this is really easy, right? If you look like me, you're probably more. Yeah, but I'm just kidding. But it is. But to me, it is. There are sort of nuance. There's a sort of nuance to this, in my opinion. But anyway, so there was a sort of gravitation toward what was a more softer presentation as I would just perceived it. And then it was contrasted with a very, very more hard presentation, right? So I would argue that, we've got if you want to talk about the sort of yielding obstinate, one was an obstinate type, perhaps in the traditional sense, as in, obstinate types. I think most people, if you're in like sort of, personality types in terms of like, MBTI, etc., you think of a thinking type, right? So there was a thinking type person, and then there was more of a feeling type person. And so for me, like I said, I was attracted to the presentation of the feeling type person. I don't know for sure if that person was a feeler or not. Like I said, it depends on what system, etc. The point is to say that what was interesting is that the mode of thinking, of sort of relaxation, would have been sort of perpetuated by that feeling type person. Does this make any sense? Probably not, but I'm just getting it out. I'm just this is going to be this is my two. This is why they call, to me, this is why they call it YouTube, right? Just kidding. But so there was sort of like, oh, I like this, so weird to say, but oh, I like this because she's with all due respect to her, she was attractive. I found her attractive. She was she presented herself in a way that I found very appealing, right? And this is not to say that I didn't find the other appealing, but I found the other more intellectually stimulating, right? And so all of this to say, what happened is that I was in a mode where I was more sort of giggly, and you almost want to say, when I become giggly, do I turn off my brain? I don't know. But I will say that it was definitely sort of that mode of like, I wasn't trying to analyze Renin dichotomies, right? I was trying to sort of just giggle, and I want to say, I'll use the term have a good time, but it wasn't really like sort of about having a good time. It was just about relaxing, right? And sort of entering into a state of relaxation where we're just giggling or kind of, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And then it was so weird because then the contrast of the video was like, no, think. And I like thinking, don't get me wrong. I like thinking, but it's interesting because I was not able to switch, right? That was the most interesting thing. It was like, it was uncomfortable for me to be put in what I would imagine almost was a vulnerable situation where I was giddy and, sort of having these sort of feelings of relaxation with the one. And then the screen would switch, and it's like the other one is like, my mom or someone like, hey, work, think, do stuff. And like I said, I'm not trying to, I hope this doesn't come off, obviously. But what was so interesting about it was that it was like I could feel the switch. And I could not only feel the switch, but I could feel like myself being mobilized to some extent to where I couldn't continue to relax, right? So, probably being a decisive type, I had to become mobilized. Now, so the question is, see, to me, it's not clear exactly what is, activating versus mobilizing function, et cetera, et cetera. To me, these are questions that probably have answers, but I like, I kind of whatever. But what's so interesting is that you could really feel it and you could really see it. And I don't know if, sort of there's this idea that, what this means, what this definitively proves, right? I will say that for sure, right, without a doubt, I was not able to continue. It was uncomfortable for me to the extent where I ended up stopping it, to continue in the relaxation state. Now, you might ask a question, because this is something that, like I said, while there was another complication in my mind, at least somewhat, sometimes what happens with me is that I purposely relax, right? So I'm sort of telling myself, oh, do your daily relaxation, right? And I'm wondering if it was also the case that I had already done my daily relaxation. I kind of stumbled across this particular piece of media. And so I wasn't planning on relaxing purely. It was sort of not for the duration of the video, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that had something, to sort of do with it. All I can say is that it was really interesting because it kind of demonstrated how, you sort of get into this sort of giddy, giggly nature where what's going on there is that I'm not really engaging with analysis. I say analysis. I don't know if it's analysis. I don't know what it is, but it's very interesting, and it's interesting because we talk about sort of this is a model of how people work, et cetera, et cetera. But then it's sort of like, well, what does this show, right? And then it's sort of the bigger question is, technically, it's interesting because, technically this is sort of like how, different people engage in different ways, right? So it's all sort of like showing how different minds work. And so this is interesting to sort of interpret the mind, is my mind different from your mind, et cetera, and how we can show how you, the viewer or whatever, interact with, would interact in a different way, right? And so we're really we're doing two things. Typology technically does two things, and I think I've always been interested in typology in the former. In other words, like I think most people are interested in typology for the opposite reason that I am, but I find it like, in other words, like I'm interested because of the first reason rather than the second reason. The first reason is maybe to show us how our minds work, right? So what is it that, sort of, can we show how you get activated in a certain way, right? And sort of do that. And to me, that's more of sort of the science, right? And I guess, I think there's another thing that says, well, given that we can show, sort of how people's minds work in discrete parts that are sort of, binary coins, then it follows that there will be differences that can also be tracked along those binary coins. And I think that that's what most people in the community are interested in, right? How are people different in a discrete manner, right? For me, it's more about sort of like, oh, how does it work, right? How do we work in general, right? And certainly it's interesting to know if there are people who work in discrete, in different manners that are in, that can be shown in discrete, sort of binary coins, et cetera, et cetera. So that's interesting, right? And, then you get sort of like, well, no, there's sort of 8 functions, et cetera. So you're like, that is to me, that's both are fascinating. I think both are really interesting. I think, obviously, with that second, like I said, I think most people who do typology are interested, obviously, in the types, right? The idea of typology. For me, I'm interested in, sort of like, well, how does it work? Can you sort of, let's run experiments to show how, people like me will get excited over stuff like that. What I'm saying? And this is where, like I said, it approaches a science, and then it's also, by doing the science, we can show how, maybe this is sort of a sociological, evolution, perhaps, I don't know, but it raises interesting questions. And I think that, this is where you get everything, right? Anyway, really excited about this video. This was the first time where I was just like really excited because it sort of was like the concrete, like sort of proof of like showing this stuff and maybe like mapping this onto something else, which I think is interesting also because that also shows kind of how I process information, right? So it's sort of like, for me, I saw the result and I was like, well, how do I sort of tie this into a general framework? And that's what I tend to do, right? So it's funny just because I think that also gets to sort of my sort of style of cognition, perhaps, right? So it's sort of like, oh, you tend to take a piece of information and try to relate it to a general framework that you're working with, and I guess that's the deductive, right? Because it's sort of like you're starting with general principles. And you're trying to prove the general principle. It's interesting. Whatever it is interesting. And I have to say that, if I can just say it, because now I see I have my time. It is interesting because, like I said, for me, it's really exciting about how the thing works, but then sort of the implications of how that works, right? Both sort of socially and otherwise, right? And it's sort of like, oh, well, because you work in a certain way, you're sort of, you're going to have a tough time in life, right? Or people are going to have a tough time relating to you, right? And I think that's where presumably this can be a force for good, or a force for like helping people be more comfortable and be more relaxed, right, in life. But I also think that, it could also become a weapon, right? A weapon in terms of, or maybe an unintentional weapon where it's sort of like you're saying, oh, we can use this in a way that helps us, but then whatever. Anyway, all of that to say, I just wanted to do that plug because I do, just to be in the interest of, you just got me really excited. But I do, I sort of think about this and I say, oh, maybe this is, this is so cool, and maybe this shows, this can be a proof of like what it definitively something is. But then it's like, what does that mean, right? Like in terms of sort of whatever, right? Am I sort of the short end of the stick, whatever. Anyway, thanks. Thanks for listening to that. That was fun. All right, bye.